Hello everybody, Earth.Otherwise here. Welcome to the review. Now, since this is the first review in the new format, I'll remind everybody that this is not a critical review. This is a technical review looking at the game design of Hollow Knight. If you want to know my feelings on the game, then you need to look at my critique. Though, I'll give you a spoiler, I think it's a good game. Now, on to the review. We'll start with presentation and discovery outside of the game itself, as usual. Hollow Knight was a Kickstarter game, so obviously it already faced and overcame the discoverability problem. They can probably rely on word of mouth and reviews like this to do most of their advertising for them, but they do have 3 videos showing off the game. One, an explicit trailer, which tells you when the game is coming out. The other 2 simple trailers that tell you about the Hollow Knight website. For the most part, these trailers do a good job of showing off the game with a kind of ambient music in the background that you'll find in the game. However, one small gripe, none of the trailers tell you where to go to get the game. Since the game can be bought in at least 3 different places, it would be nice if the store logos were in the end card of the trailers. The second gripe I have is one that I mentioned in another video. Different stores are charging different prices. I went over why that's a bad idea. Don't do it. Calculate your sums so that your game is the same price on all stores. It's not a big thing, but it can sour some customers. Now the game itself. Hollow Knight puts its best foot forward. It's not a particularly impressive game, technically speaking. The design, mechanics, and technical aspects have all been done before, to the point where they are all fairly standard. However, its aesthetic, and the art and music it uses to accomplish the aesthetic, is quite amazing. Now, that might be a bit of a backhanded compliment, but what you need to understand about being simple and standard is that it's actually quite hard for the average team. I think I can say with some certainty that many designers either want to create something new and unique, or they are not competent enough to implement the tried and true methods of games of the past, and in so doing they deviate from the standard. This certainly makes the game more unique, but at the cost of the fact that many, if not most, non-standard action platformers control like a dumpster fire or have obtuse, unintuitive playstyles. For example, if implemented incorrectly, like if the falling speed is too fast to perform a good downward attack, or if there is too much sliding after you let go of the movement key, then these standard mechanics can become a hindrance and frustration for the player. Hollow Knight, instead, most likely found and stuck with some simple movement options for the character, and then put most of their effort into the actual production part of the game, building the levels and enemies to use the mechanics to the best of the ability. And boy did they. As I've said, the art of this game is phenomenal, and something that caught my eye immediately. When I say Hollow Knight puts its best foot forward, I mean that they found a good artist or group of artists and slapped that stuff on everything. The music is nothing to sniff at either, but personally I won't be tossing it in on my music player. If you want to see game music that lends itself well to music players and having music outside of the game itself, then take a look at Undertale. Enemy variety in Hollow Knight is excellent. Every area that has a different look should have different enemies, and Hollow Knight does this pretty well. However, the enemy is lacking a bit in the interaction with mechanics and each other. When designing enemies and encounters, you must ask yourself what the player must do to defeat these enemies. For the most part in Hollow Knight, the answer is one of 3. Attack and dodge back, get underneath and attack, or bounce on top of the enemy while attacking. Occasionally, you might mix it up with a spell or 2, but for the most part, that's what you're going to do to kill all of the enemies. There's a lot of room to work with here in both the relation of enemies to the character's mechanics and the enemies' relation to one another. While I applaud Team Cherry for their unique and numerous enemies, this will most likely not work for single-person developers and people who can't churn out sprites in the same way a good artist can. There is a way to maximize the reusability of enemies by having them interact in interesting and unique ways with each other. If you have a good coder on hand, you can program enemies to act in certain ways when in proximity to each other. meaning that an encounter with 3 enemies of one type and 3 enemies of different types is completely different and unique. Also, making enemies act and react to different things the player does to or near them can increase the reusability of your enemy characters. A few characters do this in Hollow Knight, such as the Baldur shells, which curl up and become invulnerable if you get too close, or the shield-using bugs that hold up their shields to block your bouncing attacks. However, those are some of the only generally handful of examples. For the most part, you'll be facing grunt enemies, which have little or no defense and are pretty easily squashed. What I'm trying to say here is that if you don't have the kind of talent needed to push out a ton of enemies, you can instead substitute a slightly more advanced enemy AI system that reacts more readily to the world and the creatures in it. Segueing into the next topic is storytelling. Hollow Knight is sparse with its storytelling. In order to get even a general sense of what happened, you're going to have to speak to a ton of NPCs that aren't all that cooperative in telling you exactly what's going on. You'll also need to look at descriptions of items and read the minds of many characters. Now, making your story a bit obtuse and difficult to comprehend is perfectly fine, so long as your player has some singular thread that they can hold on to. Hollow Knight has a thread, but quite frankly, it's so threadbare that I have no idea what happened when the ending cutscene hit me. And that's not something that should happen. Your player should understand at the very least the most basic version of the game's story at the end of the game. Yes, everyone has the internet and can look up the more advanced story, but really your game should be the storyteller. Now, what I would suggest, if you wish to take this route, where most of the story isn't told to the player and is instead left for them to find, is that you first and foremost give the player a nice, simple story thread for them to follow through the game. Some basic motivation, maybe a bad guy, a character to catch them up on the past if needed. Something that anyone could understand while they play the game if they aren't into digging that deeply. But then also have hints, notions, and breadcrumbs leading deeper into your story. Maybe they won't dig up everything. Heck, if you do it right, they probably won't. But each new piece of information should build context onto the very simple story that acts as the core of your game, and at the end, it's fine, even good, if the player has questions. But the first question shouldn't be, what just happened, and why did it happen? They should know the answer to those questions at the very least. Further suggestions. If your items have descriptions that might be important, have that shit show up when the character picks up the item for the first time. I would propose that the majority of the game's players haven't gotten used to the habit of reading long or detailed item descriptions just yet, so shove that stuff in their face if it's important. Same with enemy descriptions if necessary. Really, beyond those few gripes, Hollow Knight is a good example of how to make a game. Stick to your guns, prevent a strong, unique aesthetic, have a solid foundation for your gameplay, add on it if you can, have good enemy and level variety, and try to have all of that tied together in a meaningful and unique way. Yes, it's a damn near impossible task, but even if you only get 3/4 of the way there, at least you'll have a good-ass game like Hollow Knight. This has been Earth.Otherwise. Thank you for watching.